I mean, the thing that I really appreciate about Ruben when he was my pitching coach for 2 years in AAA, and I appreciate honestly how blunt he was. He didn't try to sugarcoat something for me. If I sucked one day, he told me I suck. If I pitched well, hey, you did great. This could still be improved. I missed a bullpen one day because of a rain out, and he was like, you know what? Your fastball is horse right now. Why don't we stop throwing a 4-seam? Let's just mess around with a 2-seam and see how it works. We threw it inside during a rain out, and I mean, that's as a pitching coach, I guess that's a brave thing to do. To say, hey, ditch what you've done for the last 6 years to get you to this point because it's not working right now. Let's try something new.
So we're back. We're digging at home. We're not digging deep. We're at home. We're not on the road right now. It's the off season. We get to catch up with some buddies we're going to see in the future on the road, and some buddies that we got to share and go against in the clubhouse. You got to share a clubhouse with Corey Kluber. I did not. Unfortunately, I had to face him a lot of times. Klubs, we got you on the Klub. How did we come up with that nickname? I know you didn't come up with it, but how did that come about? Was that an MLB Network thing, if I believe?
I think it was a beat writer in Cleveland, maybe.
Was it?
I think so.
I love it. Sua, you got to spend some time with Kluber in Tampa Bay, so I know you're excited for this one as well.
It was. It was an awesome opportunity just to get to know Kluber, especially at that time of his career, to hear the stories of you and batters facing you, and then to have the chance to, I'm going to be honest, learn from you, and to see all the other younger players learn from you. I'm sure we'll get into that as well. But fired up to hear about your journey, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I'm pumped.
Absolutely. Klubs, I feel like there's a million different things we can ask you, and obviously we're going to, whether it's pitching mechanics, the way you train, the way you lead, your mentality, because it just seems like no one ever could break you on the mound, which we will at some point. But, a big thing is that Sua has gotten to tell us over the years, and just talking with him about Tampa, is your leadership. So not only your leadership that, people would always talk about from clubhouse to clubhouse, but now, starting Casa to Klub and starting the player-driven media stuff, kind of like me. I thought during my playing career I would never get into this type of stuff, but you find you want to help some of the younger kids, not only in pro ball, but the amateur level and all that kind of thing. So how did everything get going with Casa to Klub? And then we'll kind of backtrack and go through the career after this one.
Yeah, like you said, I think it was probably the last thing I would have guessed that I was going to be doing, post-playing, and probably everybody else too. But the opportunity kind of came up, and I wasn't doing anything at that point in time. I was actually really bored. You go through those first few months of retirement not knowing what to do at all. And so I was like, yeah, let's give it a shot. I thought it was a unique opportunity, like you said, to kind of give players perspective of things. A lot of what everybody's exposed to, like we all know, is kind of the mainstream media, and a lot of that probably has some of an agenda tied to it. And I thought that it was a good opportunity to give guys a chance, if they wanted to kind of speak their own mind and give their own side of certain things.
I do love that. So real quick, talking about speaking your own mind and talking about being bored. So when I get traded over to Boston, I go on the IL like 2 weeks into being there, which was terrible, but I'm on the IL for about a month. So I get done with my rehab throughout the day, and I'm basically living the lifestyle of a starting pitcher that's not pitching on that day. I go into the stadium, I do all my work, and then by the time it's like 5, 6 o'clock, I'm ready for the game to start, ready to watch a game. And it is boring, man. And I say that humbly speaking, being a baseball player, someone that's a part of the action plan, trying to play 162 games a year. But with that being said, so many players have so many great conversations in the dugout. And Sua, I mean, you of all people have had some of the most epic conversations with people in the dugout, but whole different lifestyle that got to open my eyes when I was in Boston, being in the dugout.
I mean, imagine doing that 4 to 5 days not at Fenway Park, and it's even more boring.
Oh my goodness!
I'm actually curious, Klubs. How many episodes have you guys done on your podcast?
I think we're just shy of 25 right now.
Okay, shy of 25. Awesome, by the way. What have you noticed? Are there any governing principles or themes that you have learned that maybe you didn't expect, whether things they've said, certain themes that keep coming up? What have you learned after talking to some of these guys?
I think the biggest thing that I've learned so far is just how willing guys are to talk about their experiences and stuff that they're not normally asked. We've had some people come in that I don't necessarily have a relationship with prior to, and you can tell they're a little bit kind of feeling out the situation at first. And as soon as they get comfortable, they're just, they're ready to let whatever roll off. I think the biggest thing with like a constant theme from everybody though is attention to detail in whatever you're doing, whether it's your craft, whether it's preparation, all that stuff. Like all these elite athletes that we have the opportunity to talk to take so much pride in doing the little things that they know are like the separators between being really, really good and just kind of hanging on.
Yeah, that's so true. And Klubs, I don't know if you noticed, but I definitely took a notice to when you're the athlete, when you're a player, you're trying to get as best as you can possibly get. When we first got called up to the big leagues, it was like everyone's going home in the off season. We're going to weight lift. We're training in the off season, not only during season, but spring training and off season to get better. And now it seems like more guys are really paying attention to that mental side. And that's where I've said it time and time where Sua, man, I wish I could have played with you and had shared a clubhouse with you, because the mental side of a baseball game is, I mean, the baseball season is absolutely crucial. And it's almost like as a hitter, when playing every day, you try and limit the at-bats you give away. So mentally, that's when you give away your at-bats, is when you're just kind of checked out. You try and stay focused and locked in. I mean, Klubs, you've been through so much to your career. Everyone just sees all the Cy Youngs and the success. But leading up to that, I mean, you had some injuries in the minor leagues, and you never really got healthy until a certain point. So I'm sure mentally that's got to be good, because you got to seem like you've been through kind of every situation, ups and downs throughout the course of a season.
Yeah, no, I wasn't a highly touted prospect, didn't have a very clean ascension to the big leagues or anything like that. And I think it kind of forced me to develop that mental toughness, you know, that you're talking about. And I think that I realized early on how important that was, because it allowed me to get over difficult times when I wasn't ready to just call it quits yet. You know, I wanted to keep trying to chase that dream. And I think that realizing that allowed me to have an open mind of working with people like Sua or working with mental skills coaches earlier on in my career, whereas I feel like you were probably the same way, I would imagine. A lot of people, when we were first getting in the big leagues, there was still a stigma about mental skills or working on the mental side of the game and stuff, because I think people thought they were maybe too tough for it, or they thought, you know, somebody was going to run back to the front office if they said something that was damning or whatever. I think nowadays it's a lot different, because I think, like you said, people do realize how important it is.
We always talk about, you know, the mental side. When you start doing these exercises and you start trying to train the mind, it becomes a lifestyle. It's the same thing as nutrition. If you're trying to get healthy, you can't just do it for 7 days or 2 months and then take some time off, or say you're going to do it Monday through Friday. I mean, essentially, it's got to become a lifestyle for you to fully commit and make that change. I've always thought that guys like Klubs and Sua are in a weird position, because you get to a point in time in your career where, like Klubs said, early on, it's almost like if you do go to somebody like yourself, Sua, and say, hey, man, I'm struggling right now, I need help mentally, it's almost like the organization, we're going to look at that and be like, hey, I don't know if we can count on this guy right now because he's going through it mentally. We got to be careful. To fast forward to now, guys like yourself are some of the most valuable people in the clubhouse, because guys, players are vulnerable and coming up to you saying, hey, I need to talk. Let's keep this day-to-day dialogue going. How many guys have you seen kind of in that time era that's Klubs and I came up 2010 to now in the late, or 22, 20, whatever, 24? How many of those guys were in between, started out one way, then came to you and said, man, I see all these younger guys doing this crazy stuff and having success. Maybe I should start going doing this stuff mentally, whatever it is. I bet those are some of those like dugout conversations that you have during the games.
What's interesting about what you say, what you ask, is I have I don't know if you remember this, Klubs, hundreds of conversations over the past X amount of years in different sports. But there are some memorable conversations I've had with Klubs personally. He taught me something that I will never forget. I actually asked him the question because I didn't know what Klubs was going to be like. You never know if you're going to build a friendship. And I'm talking about a friendship with these athletes. And him and I were sitting and talking and having our normal conversation. And I don't know if you remember this. And I actually asked Corey, I said, like, how are you like talking to me? Like really, like we would just chat, like we would just sit and we would talk about the team and talk about himself. And it was interesting. He shared that he's at a place, and correct me if I'm wrong, Klubs, you're at a place in your career at that point where you were just so open and vulnerable and transparent. And it wasn't like, and I didn't give Corey, exercises. Like, we didn't do like skills, and we didn't do like, here, do this breathing technique. It was conversational. It was more, he was open and breaking down, hey, this is where my mind is before this start. This is what my assessment of this last start was. This is my assessment of the culture and leadership. And we'd have these emerging conversations. What was interesting, it's the veterans who we would have these conversations with. And it was the younger guys who didn't fail as much through the minor leagues who came up and, oh, I'm just going to go out there and play, who were less open to having more vulnerable conversations and being open. And I don't know if, was that your guys? Is that true, Klubs? I could be making this up, but do you feel like you were, I don't know, just felt more secure the older you got and you're like, okay, like we can have these conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I think that at that point in time, I was pretty, I don't know if content is the right word, but I feel like I had accomplished more than I thought I was going to accomplish in my career at that point. So at that point, I was trying to figure out ways to keep growing as a player. You know, I knew that I was probably close to the end of the road in terms of my career. And, you know, if I was going to keep playing for another couple of years, I feel like I had to find other ways to bring value if maybe the physical skills weren't what they once were. And so I think that you get to that stage and, like you said, you're probably a little more comfortable in being vulnerable because, you know, I had accomplished a lot more than I ever thought that I would. And I wasn't still trying to necessarily prove myself to an organization like some of those young guys are, that maybe they're a little more guarded.
And then how, Klubs, let me ask you this. Did you feel like towards the end, it was not harder, maybe a little more difficult or different to connect with some of the younger guys that were coming up versus maybe in Cleveland when a younger guy was coming up? Did you feel there was a little difference there?
Yeah, I think on multiple fronts, probably because, you know, towards the end of my time in Cleveland, a lot of those guys that were being called up had been in the organization when I was already there. So I feel like, you know, you see them in spring training, you see them if they get called up for a cup of coffee here or there, and by the time they get there and establish themselves, there's a little bit of a relationship built there already. Whereas you go to a new organization, like when I was in Tampa, you know, it's my first year there. I had no prior relationship with anybody on the team, and so yeah, maybe a little bit more of that feeling out period to just to get guys to feel comfortable. I think that if you're a young guy and you're having a conversation with a guy that's been around for a while, there's a little bit of uncomfortableness there because, you know, you don't want to ruffle any feathers or, you know, feel like you're taking away from their time and what they need to do. So, yeah, I guess it was different in both cases.
At what point in your Tampa stint, did you realize, oh, they're looking to me as a leader?
I think spring training, with the way Port Charlotte is, especially being, it's a bunch of different buildings, you know, scattered throughout the complex. It's not one big building that houses a weight room and a food room and a locker room and stuff. So there's always people moving around to a lot of different places. And spring training has a lot of movement in general, but I feel like the way that complex is kind of put together, the guys that were in the group that I was in for PFPs, throwing pens, all that kind of stuff, yeah, you develop a relationship with them, but I don't think aside from the little bit of time in the locker room and stuff, had much time at all with any position players up to that point. So there's maybe a different relationship with the pitchers when the season starts as opposed to some of the position players. Because I was also living in Tampa at that point. I wasn't in Port Charlotte, so commuting a lot and not a whole lot of time to go out to dinner, you know, that kind of thing to build relationships with guys either. But it happened pretty quickly, I think, once the season started.
I will say one thing that's very memorable to me is every team, as you both know, has their own identity because of the roster construction, the age, how many wins and losses. There's a lot of variables that go into the identity of a given team any given season. And there are certain things you do and you don't do. What worked in one season may not work in another season when you're trying to build culture with the team. There was one thing that you and I experienced, Klubs, with the year you were there that I, in my entire career, for any sport I've ever worked with, I've never done. And I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. You probably know what I'm talking about. We did something where we would have, maybe we did it 3 or 4 times, where we would have a players only roundtable discussion around different topics. And there was no teacher. There was no instructor. There was no one leading the conversation. It was just a topic. And the topic was, what do you got on confidence? And then everyone would just talk about it. What do you got on? How do you stay positive during downtimes? And everyone would talk about it. Klubs, can you talk about what were those like for you, and why do you think those were beneficial?
First off, I was floored by how many guys came. The first time we did it, I think you sent out a message to everybody 2 or 3 days beforehand. We're going to do this at, say, 2:30 before we go stretch or something like that. No pressure, but if you want to show up, this is where it's going to be. I bet you there was 15 to 20 guys there the first time, most of the team. And by the time the second or third one rolled around, there was almost an entire roster unless like starting pitcher that day. There was Spanish-speaking players with translators in there. I think that a lot of people bought in initially, but once they kind of heard other people talking about doing it, then that fear of doing something different or maybe a stigma attached to it went away pretty quickly. But I think it was cool just to hear guys openly lay out, what works for them, what they've struggled with, things like that. And then you bounce off those conversations. It worked very organically.
And I will say this, the reason I bring this up, Haz, I was terrified to do this.
Really?
And I was actually, the reason I was terrified is because this wasn't my idea. I was like, there's no way this is going to happen. And You probably hate me saying this, Klubs, but this was Kluber's idea. He was like, let's do it. And I'm like, Klubs, I don't know, man. What if no one shows up? And he's like, do it. I'm like, oh, I was like nervous. And then he goes, and he told me, he goes, Justin, he goes, I'll be there. Just, I think we need it. Let's do it. And he, in typical Klubs fashion, he was just like, yeah, and don't like make it sound like I'm telling everyone to do it. We have to be there. Just make it autonomous, make it up to them. And I respected that. And it was neat to see the leadership of Kluber to kind of guide me and direct me. And like, I'm like, okay, I'll follow your lead. We'll do this. And it was a leadership of Kluber to say, this is what this team needs. Let's get in here. We don't need anyone teaching us. We don't mental skill us, Justin. We will teach ourselves. And I just thought that was awesome. And correct me if I'm wrong, Klubs.
Well, we were
sorry for bringing that up.
We were a very young team
awesome.
And pretty easy to see. You were very aware of it. I was aware of it. I think a lot of other people were that there wasn't any of the just sitting around the locker room having conversations, really. If guys were sitting at their locker, it was with the face in the phone. If guys were training tables with the face in the phone, there was never any just actual like camaraderie being developed or conversations happening that might lead to, going out. I mean, it's a real thing, going out there and having more give a shit for each other when somebody else is struggling through a hard time, right? That kind of stuff. And just trying to invite conversations amongst guys to kind of develop those, I guess, relationships a little bit more than not just, having 26 individuals sitting in the clubhouse.
Yeah, I love that. That's the experience talking for sure, because that's when, as you get older as a player, you're just kind of seeing everything unfold in front of you and you have your opinions and you want to help. And that's what's so funny. Stuart, you said how each team has, kind of their identity, and it's the same thing with players. And Kluber going to Tampa with, 2 Cy Youngs with all-star games, big contracts, all that kind of thing. There's still a system and a way of going over there, doing things the right way for the clubhouse culture. And it's like, you're going to go over there. Spring training is a perfect time to kind of sit back, see how the flow goes. You're going to have your group of pitchers that you're kind of grouped up with every day doing stuff. And then you have that 3 weeks to be like, all right, guys, before we go and break for season, this stuff has to change. But Klubs, we're with the Yankees, the Red Sox, AL East, obviously Cleveland, but then to go to Tampa, Tampa's always had that identity of doing that kind of sit down, like you're saying, Sue. It's like dating all the way back to the Joe Madden days. They had a week called Legion Ball, where they wouldn't show up to the ballpark until 5:00 in the afternoon to just basically get ready for a 6:30 game. And it was like a mental clear up for them. So what is your kind of evaluation on the difference between the Yankees, super buttoned up from what it seems like on the outside, to a Tampa, to where it seems like they're kind of quirky and they're willing to do whatever anybody says or do whatever you want to do, and they get the max out of all their players every time?
I think a lot of it is what the resources are, right? Or how you want to allocate the resources that you have. New York, I feel like it more so allocates those resources to a roster of players, whereas I feel like Tampa Bay maybe doesn't allocate as much of their resources to the roster, but they find other areas to allocate more than other teams do, whether that be Somebody like Sewer, whether it be scouting or analytical stuff, things like that. So I think it's choosing. I guess first of all, you got to know what your resources are. They probably don't have the resources to go have a $300 million payroll. Okay, if that's the case, what are we going to do to maximize what we are capable of going out there and putting out on the field? So that was interesting for me to see, because going from New York, where, don't get me wrong, they spent a ton on technology, scouting, analytics, all that stuff. Maybe just a different way of going about doing it in relation to the players that were out on the field with Tampa, finding, not necessarily finding a way to, every team wants to make their players better, but identifying something very, very, very specific within each guy and going about improving that quality of them to build the best 26 player roster.
Yeah, I always feel like with the technology and the new information, as a coach, you really need to be able, and players need a coach to be able to translate the information to them and a way to make it make sense to them. And I feel like Tampa, Cleveland, you guys have had so much success pitching. They've had success developing pitching. It almost feels like they can just translate that information better and basically take out whatever pitch is getting you in trouble and just hammer whatever pitch is good for you. And I know Ruben Niebla, I was with him in San Diego. He's a big, guys love him. It's almost like they talk about Spagnuolo, defensive coordinator with the Chiefs. This guy is a pitching guru. So was he kind of just good at translating that kind of thing and just like, hey, Klubs, this is what you need to lock in on, and that's what makes you successful?
The thing that I really appreciate about Ruben, when he was my pitching coach for 2 years in AAA, and then he was the minor league coordinator after that. But obviously still had a relationship with him. I appreciated, honestly, how blunt he was. He didn't try to sugarcoat something for me. If I sucked one day, he told me I sucked. If I pitched well, hey, you did great. This could still be improved. And then I think when it came down to the point of trying to find a way to make me better, he wasn't afraid to suggest something that might be out of the box or take a risk. It's well documented, but I missed a bullpen one day because of a rain out, and he was like, you know what? Your fastball is horseshit right now. Why don't we stop throwing a 4-seam? Let's just mess around with a 2-seam and see how it works. We threw it inside during a rain out, and that's, as a pitching coach, I guess that's a brave thing to do, to say, hey, ditch what you've done for the last 6 years to get you to this point, because it's not working right now, and let's try something new. I don't think he was afraid of that.
Sua, honesty, man. We talk about that all the time, how important that is.
I actually have a question about that for even both of you on this. I loved how you said one of the things you valued about him was his blunt. He's blunt, just cuts right through it. Could any coach just be blunt with you? Did you give that permission, that leeway, both of you, to just allow anyone just be blunt? Or what differentiates those who you allow to be blunt with you versus those who you do not allow to be blunt with you?
I will say that there's probably there has to be a trust factor developed there first, right? You can't just come out the first day of spring training and tell a guy you've never worked with before to shit can what you've done to this point and all of a sudden try something new. But I think that, if you have a trust in him, and at the same time, I was in a position where I had probably a mid-5 in AAA. I wasn't going anywhere at that point. What did I have to lose?
We talk a lot about coaching on this podcast. What do you guys, I'll start with you, Klubs, and then I actually am curious what you have to say, Haas. How do coaches, a lot of coaches listen to this, how do coaches build trust with elite athletes such as yourselves? I loved how you said that. You got to trust them. How does a coach do that?
I think it's probably different for each guy. It's probably the toughest part, right? What's going to work for me isn't going to work for Haas, isn't going to work for somebody else. Being able to identify that. And I guess maybe that comes from building relationships with guys. I think the best coaches I had were always the ones who were in the clubhouse. They were going around talking to guys. They were out in the open. They weren't just huddled up in the coach's room, scrolling through a computer, looking at reports. And then you see them out there for the throwing program, and then you don't see them again until it's the dugout, for the game to start.
No, I agree. I agree with Klubs. I think first and foremost, you want honesty. You want coaches to be blunt with you. You don't want them to just say, good job, go to the next one, whatever. You need that honesty. And at the end of the day, I think the relationship's so important because you got to know this coach believes in you, and you got to know he's pulling for you and he's in your corner. I think at the professional level, there's times where the coach is so worried about their own jobs and they feel like they gotta, have a rehearsal for the manager to keep their job alive, that then spreads to the player, and the player can feel that. And it's almost like the coach is like, hey, I've been telling him he needs to make this adjustment and he's just not doing it. And then it becomes that internal battle. And for me, that's where, like, where your guys' players sit down in Tampa, what I love about this is I feel like the best teams, the good clubhouses, the good cultures, it's all out in the open. I mean, you can have a funny way of joking about things and sending a message out there to a guy being like, okay, I need to kind of lock it in a little bit. And then the bad teams, it's all whispers. I mean, these people are huddled up in this locker. These people are huddled up in this locker. And it's all just whispers, and they're all pointing a finger at each other. And then by the time you know it, it's like, man, we can't compete like this if everyone's not pulling on the same rope. So that's the stuff that I felt like Tampa Bay was always why that clubhouse culture mattered and why you guys would get everything out of your players, is because I feel like if there was any mix-up like that, it's boom, it's nipped right there that day on the spot.
One of the things that Snyder said to me, I think in spring training, he said, I work for you. The Rays employ me, but I work for you and the other pitchers on the staff. I was like, damn, all right.
Snyder's got, and both you guys can talk about him a little bit, because I mean, I was locker mates with Blake Snell, and Sua, I've told you how much Snell's talked about you, but Kyle Snyder is probably the second most talked about guy that Snell would talk about, because he loved this dude. I mean, he would run through a brick wall after reading a text message from Snyder. So is that just him? You felt that? You felt like he's in your corner? You felt like he's there for you for whatever you need?
100%. And like I was saying earlier, he wasn't afraid to be honest with you, which I totally appreciated too. But yeah, he was, whichever guy had a side that day, he was all in from 4 o'clock to 4:20 with that guy. He was out there watching them long toss, go over their side, sit there, talk about it with them for 10 minutes afterwards. All right, that's done. I'm all in on these other 10 guys out here playing catch, getting ready for the game. They want to get off the mound that day. All right, for that 2 or 3 minutes, I'm all yours. Nobody else bothered me. You got something you want to go in there in the office and talk about? He can be in the middle of a meeting. Like, yeah, give me 1 minute. Drop everything he's doing and come talk to you.
And Sua, the sense I get, I've never gotten to share a club. I've never had a conversation with Snyder, but the sense I get from the outside kind of looking in is he just has so much confidence in his craft. Whether or not he's talking with Klub's a 2-time Cy Young Award winner, or a guy that's the 27th, 28th man, however many they have now, up and down, it feels like you're going to get the same answers, the same truth, and he's the same guy no matter who he's talking to.
Klub said it perfect. I think Snyder is a master at shaping the messaging to the player. And I think he knows what levers to pull and push on to get the best out of a player. He knows, and I don't want to speak for you two, I'm not an elite athlete myself, but I think that based on my observation, elite athletes respect coaches who know their stuff. If you know your stuff and you have paid the price to gain knowledge and listen to players and know how the body works and metrics, and you're just not clueless, it seems like elite athletes like you guys know, you respect and trust that person, that, oh, there's a process and a purpose to what you're telling me. You're not just throwing up Hail Marys. And Snyder is very good at doing that and sharing the right amount of information with the right person, even to the point, like Kluber saying, he'll go and find motivational videos for some guys who love that kind of stuff. He'll find data and metrics for guys who like this kind of stuff. And he'll find body, kinetic chains stuff for certain players. It's wild how much he knows.
And he knows it all too. Like, he can speak to it.
Yes. That's what I love. I took notice towards like the last couple of years of my career when coaches would talk in meetings or have, just little quick presentations. I would always kind of just sit back and listen and just kind of evaluate what they were saying and want to ask them questions after and want to pick their brains more about it. And I always felt like the ones that I respected the most was you can catch them at any point in time and ask them a pitching question, ask them a question about the body when you're delivering something, and it's like, boom, on the spot, he knows it. To where some of the analytical guys towards the end, where I felt like if they didn't know they were having a presentation tomorrow at 1 o'clock and you just hit them right on the spot and asked them, I just felt like they were never that confident and didn't really know the craft like a Snyder did,
Or if they're just making up an answer, you can see through it pretty quick too.
Yes, you cannot fool big league players, let alone professional players.
You cannot.
That is
I told somebody this, and I think it's because of the nature of baseball. Not even so much football, not so much basketball, but baseball players you have such an awareness of, I don't know what it is about you guys. I don't know why. But when someone walks into that clubhouse, your guys' radar, your BS radar, you can kind of feel when someone opens their talk, like, I don't know what it is, how fast you guys are at being able to detect someone who's lying or detect someone's off on their routine. There's something about you guys. You can just read it. Your ability to read human beings is elite. It's crazy.
Oh man, everyone's got the guy in the clubhouse
for 6 months. So
yeah, just
what the normal is when something's off.
Somebody new walks in there, you just sit back and start evaluating what the hell's going on here. Who's panicking? What's going on? Klubs, let me ask you this, man, because from that 14 to 18 run you had, there was not much panic in your game at all. And I feel like a lot of people at the professional level think that pitching coaches, hitting coaches are there for mechanics, but like we've been talking about, like you'll go up to a coach every now and then and say, hey man, this feels off. What do you got here? But mostly it's mental. And I think it's preparation and routine and approach. From those years, were you just so locked in of like, if I just execute what I need to execute, nobody can hit my stuff? Because I mean, that 4-year run, whatever it was, however many years, it was damn near unhittable, man. And mentally, you just had to be unstoppable at that point.
A lot of times, not always, but a lot of times it would be somewhat of a struggle to kind of find my groove out of spring training. You know, you get in the flow of the season. You know, you hear about pitchers and hitters talk about that all the time. But then when I feel like I found that groove, it was almost like you have these mental cues that work for you. Same with your swing. It wasn't necessarily always the same thing for me every year, because sometimes I try to revert back to what worked, and it wouldn't, because your body feels different. It's just not quite clicking the same way. I recognize what the cues were that were working for me at that point in time, and I think, you know, a lot of the same way when a hitter's hot. You stick with the same routine, but a lot of it you just kind of want to stay out of your own way. Don't overcomplicate things. Things are going well. Just keep doing it. Just keep riding it out. And so kind of having the recognition of what was working, remembering that, I would always write it down. You know, if I felt something that worked, write it down. I go back to it and look at it. I was always, I think most guys, there's always ideas coming in and out, you know, bouncing around. Something felt off. All right, let's try this to make the adjustment. That didn't work. All right, well, I want to go back to that again. So write down what works so that I can remember it. There's going to be good starts, bad starts mixed in. But for me, I was always trying to keep that, whatever that baseline is, keep that as high of a level as I could when I got to that sort of groove stage.
I love that. When you're rolling it, I feel like the thoughts, everything is simple. And if you can just keep it simple for that long, then you're rolling. It's just boom. And towards the end, it felt like it became a battle between yourself. If you can just feel healthy and feel like you can kind of do the things you need to do, then you were going to go out and have a good day, because you knew what you needed to, you know, if I'm facing you, I know you're or you got the two seam, you got the slurve, the sweeper, whatever they call it now. And then if you got a Salzar, it's going to be 4-seamers at the top. So like, you know, the assignment each day, it's just a matter of getting yourself healthy and being able to roll and go and perform. And let me ask you this, Klubs, because we kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, but as an athlete, I tell Sua, and I talk to him all the time about this, I feel like, again, our time that we were at the big leagues, there's a generation, or there's an era of now these young guys are coming, doing all these different type of training methods, I don't know if you were a heavy ball guy or whatever, but they're doing this, they're gaining velocity. As an older player, once you kind of have a year that you don't really feel is up to par, you start thinking like, do I need to start changing? Do I need to start trying some of this stuff? And then you kind of get, you know, away from your natural stuff. And I felt like that happened to me in San Diego. Try to get the ball in the air, try to get the ball to the pool side. And that kind of took away from my natural ability to go to the opposite field. So do you feel that battle of like trying to stay with yourself and your routine, but at the same time, you want to get as best as you possibly can and you want to add?
Yeah, I wish I would have been maybe less open-minded to certain things that younger guys would do and you see them doing. And it was stuff that I hadn't done for the first, say, 12 years of my career, and then for the last 1 or 2 you experiment with it and it doesn't work. But I feel like some of that experimentation for me took away the ability to get those feelings that I was talking about. You know, you're introducing new ideas into your chain, and now all of a sudden the stuff that I used to be able to easily rely on going back to is a lot harder to find. And I think that I did the same thing. I dug myself into a little bit of a hole, especially in Boston my last season, trying too hard to make a change when I didn't get results right away, instead of maybe having enough confidence that I could still revert back to what has always worked for me, and it was going to be good enough. Maybe a little bit of a sense of panic set in.
So yes, I agree with you. Is there such thing as being too coachable? And then do you want to be stubborn? Like, what's that fine line as a player?
So I will answer that, and then I have a follow-up question for both of you on what you just said, Klubs and you, Haas. So every positive character trait has a shadow side. So a player who's open to change, open to coaching, the shadow side is being, like Klub said, too open. And all of a sudden you're taking pitching advice from the clubhouse manager, or you're taking hitting advice from someone who has nothing to do with hitting. You're just open to just learning from anybody. That's the shadow side of it. Based on what you both are saying, there's something called hindsight bias, which is essentially like, I wish I would have done this. And it's normal. It's natural, because now we can say that based on the information we have now, the experience. But at the time, Klub, you were going through it in Boston, Haas, you're going through it in San Diego, you didn't have the information you have sitting here today. If you were to get in that time machine and go to speak to that version of you, you know what that guy is like. You know his personality. What would you tell him? And knowing that he might push against you, but what could you possibly tell him to not make that, I don't want to say mistake, but not go down that route, to be too open, to make all these changes? Like, what would you have done differently?
So me, I felt like at that point in time, I would go tell myself, listen, you have to find that line of being coachable, but at the same time, knowing what works for you. Because at that point in time in San Diego, I'm 8-9 years into my big league career, plenty of years into my professional career. So I love, like what Kluber said, when you're trying something different, that's a whole different movement for your whole, kinetic chain, the motion, all that kind of thing. So you have to really identify yourself as a player and understand, hey, listen, you're going to a new place, you're going to a new system. It was almost like from Kansas City to San Diego. Kansas City, we really didn't talk about analytics at all. And then I went to San Diego, and it was like a complete different language of baseball. So I then was like, hey, I want to be coachable. I want to be part of the team. I need to buy into what they're trying to get me to do and what I'm, trying to be productive for this team. So I think that's where I have to balance it in. And you're 8-9 years in, you've earned the right, what made you successful, to then go up to them and be like, hey, listen, this is what makes me good. You got the player that I am, and this is what I need to be the player that I am. So that's that fine line of being coachable, but at the same time, kind of earning the right to be stubborn, right, Klubs?
Yeah, and I think it's like you said, when you go to a new place, a new organization, a new, structure of it, there's going to be numerous differences between what you experienced prior. And I think there has to be a feeling out period of, the information, the coaching that I'm getting here is different. I have to figure out what will and won't work for me. I need to know what makes me good, what clicks with me. And I need to be able to sort out the stuff that is and is not going to work. And if something doesn't work, I have to tell them, like you said, that's not for me. We've played with guys who they go in and they're not open to anything. It may be a little bit of a mix of some of those. You still want to be true to who you are, be coachable, be a good teammate, be a leader, whatever it might be. But at the same time, be able to be confident enough in yourself to know what does and does not work.
You have to, as a baseball player, not only, when you're getting critiqued or you're changing mechanics, you have to really understand it for yourself, because I felt like I always relied on another pair of eyes, whether it was a hitting coach, a teammate, to be like, hey, man, you're doing this, you're off here, you're off there. But in reality, at the professional level, you're bouncing around to so many different places. Coaches are bouncing around. So you truly have to understand it and know on your own, and not rely on a different set of eyes or anything like that. So baseball, man, it's all about that accountability, whether or not you're learning mechanics, whether or not you're on your routine, whatnot.
Just to tie up what you both said, I really want to make sure we don't miss this point for anyone who's listening to this. You both highlighted 3 things, like a 3-step formula, essentially. I just wanted to make sure you both said the both same thing. Number 1, know who you are. Like, know your fundamentals and what works for me. And then kind of a corollary is like, know what doesn't work for me. Like, this doesn't work. And then I think you said the key point, both of you said it, communicate it. Say it. Have that hard conversation. There's a phrase I love. If you don't know what you want, people will get you to do what they want. And so if it looks like you're flustered, you're searching, and then coaches and other people who want to help, They literally want to help. They're going to give you, hey, try this, do this, do this, do this. But once you are emphatic on this is who I am, this is what I want, I'm going to communicate it. This is what I'm going to do. People will be like, oh, okay, you know what you want. Gotcha. Yeah. Especially if you're a veteran and paid the price and have that. But I just wanted to make sure as we move on, like you two came up with a great, like that was awesome what you both said.
I love that. Let me ask you this, Sua, as a younger player, how do you come up to, say you come up to the big leagues, you're doing stuff on your own in the minor leagues, you get to the big league club and the big league coach or big league team is asking something different of you, but you're in a different position. You're young. How do you then, what's that fine line of being coachable, being young and wanting to buy in, but at the same time wanting to stick to your own stuff?
I actually am very curious on what you two say. I actually experienced this so many times. And I'm going to be honest, like there are moments where I don't know what to say, like, because you just got to the big leagues. You don't want to do anything that's going to get you sent down or be perceived as a guy who's disagreeable and is not coachable and is not a team player. Oh, like, yes, this helped me in the minor leagues, but if this coach or this analytics is saying this will help me stay longer in the big leagues, I'm going to do that. Yes. Even if it gets away from my own identity, and then they start doing it and then it's not working. They're like, uh-oh, now I'm getting away from building bad habits. I'm getting away. Do I say something? Mm-hmm. I'm a young kid. There was a time this happened and I was lost. I didn't know what to tell the player because like, I don't know. And so I actually got advice from a veteran. I said, hey, like this, like, what do you do? And then the veteran told me, oh, I would do this. Hey, do you mind talking to that young player? You two have like, let's eat together and let's just kind of talk about it for his situation. But that's tricky. What advice do you guys? Because I'm sure there's a young player listening. What would you do in that situation?
Dude, if I'm going to make Klub's a right-handed hitting right fielder that's got 50 homers in his last year. Because if I'm a young guy on the New York Yankees and I'm Aaron Judge and you have your veteran in the locker room and I go in the offseason and I got this weird style of hitting that I snap my barrel and I do all this stuff, but then I go to the cage and the hitting coach is telling me to pull down with my hands and do this different thing that I've just trained all offseason to do. I'm going right up to a veteran, make that Klub's the right fielder with 50 homers and being like, hey, man, what do I do in this situation? Like, I just trained myself to do this. I know the coach wants me doing this, but I got to buy in. And ultimately, I think that's that culture that we talk about, that everything is out in the air, everything's out and open, and the communication's key.
That's exactly what I was going to say, is that you still have to have that difficult conversation. You just redirect that difficult conversation to a veteran or somebody you trust that's been there, that's gone through probably a lot of these same experiences that you're going through now. Have the conversation with them first, and I think that guides you on how to approach it, how to have the conversation with a coach if you're feeling like something's not there that you need.
Yeah, player to player, Sua. We always talk about how important a player to player can be.
Yeah, I agree. And if you're a coach watching this, and if I'm a coach listening to that, I'm like, oh, wow, I need to be aware that, oh, I might be trying to change something that's fundamentally difficult for this player. And to have the feel to know that, oh, this player might be thinking all of these things. So I need to articulate that and say, hey, you might be feeling this, or you might be feeling we're changing your identity, or you're going to wonder, can I trust this process? And just to normalize that, oh, yeah, I am feeling that. So yes, you as a player, please be open with me. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk. I want to know how you feel. This discomfort, it's going to be hard. It's going to be awkward, but let's have that conversation. But as you both know, it's easier said than done once you're in the middle of a season and the losses start stacking up and jobs are on the line. It's easy to talk about this in the off season sometimes.
I feel like coaching now, I would imagine, is more difficult than it used to be as well, because everybody has their own personal pitching coach, their own personal hitting coach, who's teaching them a certain method of doing things. And if you're the Rays pitching coach or the Rays hitting coach or any team, you have to have a knowledge of probably 5 or 6 different ways to hit that you can then relate to and talk to guys about, as opposed to, I don't know, maybe 5-10 years ago, I feel like pitching there was stay back over the rubber, out in front, down and away, all that kind of stuff, where a lot of times that stuff still works, but guys have their own ways, systems of going about getting results now that might be different than just what that coach is accustomed to teaching.
Yep. I used to tell all our coaches, man, the super, super old school ones that I ain't learning that new analytics, blah, blah. I'm like, dude, you don't have to buy into it, but you need to know what it is, because these young kids now, that's their language. You need to relate. You need to understand and speak their language. We got a couple fun ones for you, Klub. You're the man, dude. You spent a lot of time. We appreciate this. But real quick, I know you want to love on Tito, man. Terry Francona, he's back in the game. Definitely want to get your opinions or your thoughts on Tito, because, again, I wish I could have shared a clubhouse with him.
He's the best. You talk about one guy kind of creating that overall culture. I think he's the best at it. I think anybody who's played for him would say he's the best at it. When it needs to be, he'll have a difficult conversation. He'll be straight up. He'll be forward with guys, but in general, it's laid back. It's let you do your thing. What can I do to make you feel more confident, more comfortable? Yeah, I don't have enough good things to say about him.
Oh, man, you got any good Tito stories? I heard when he got the job in Cleveland that whoever, I don't know if it was Antonetti, whoever was the GM, walked into the manager's office to meet him, and he was in the shirt, and he's like, hey, I'm in here. Just come on in. Let's go. Let's start it up.
Everybody's ever played for him has walked into his office while he's on the can, for sure. Or wide open, too. No shame.
Oh, man. What a beauty, dude. What an absolute beauty. Okay, so the Soto contract, obviously that's a big one. I mean, crazy amount of money, whatever. That's close to $1 billion. Paul Skeens, you guys have the same, stoic mentality, that unbreakable type thing. Paul Skeens gets to free agency, 27, 28 years old. And I mean, the first year it was unbelievable, a lot of work to do. But I mean, what's that contract going to look like?
I mean, the way salaries are escalating, it's hard to imagine what it might look like. Obviously with a pitcher, staying healthy is the first and foremost. I'd be interested to see more so than his free agency, what kind of effort Pittsburgh makes in the next couple of years to lock what that would look like. Because players are pretty knowledgeable nowadays. They know, what the benefit to signing or not signing early is. And I feel like teams are going to have to start getting even more aggressive in signing guys early, and maybe not trying to get them at such a discount that they used to try to.
Yeah, definitely. Because, I mean, you look at some of the contracts now, like Soto, and then some of the guys that signed extensions earlier, and you're thinking about what money they missed out on, and it's like, geez, that's insane, man. Top 3 hitters you faced, and since we've already joked about this on your program, you don't have to say me, because I know I got lucky off you a couple times, so we'll skip me, and you can go 3 other guys. It's all good.
Toughest 3. Miggy's hands down number 1.
And that's so crazy, because if you're two-seamer right on right against Miggy, and he's still that good.
Yeah, I think he knew what I was going to throw him. I don't know, but he was never fooled. Or if he was fooled once, he definitely wasn't fooled a second time.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
That whole lineup, too, in Detroit. Yeesh. Nasty.
It's unreal for a long time.
And then maybe let's just go one lefty. We won't make you go top 3.
One lefty. If I had to go one lefty that probably gave me, Kendrys Morales crushed me.
That guy can hit, man. That guy.
Yeah,
we're seeing him. We have our 10-year reunion coming up this year, and I cannot wait to see him. No one's seen him, and that since we've won the World Series, I think that year after when he signed away, no one's seen him since. I can't wait, dude. This guy was a legend. When you gave him a high five, it was like just going to a block and just pounding a block against your hand. It was so hard, man. Yeah. Klubs, you're the man, dude. Thank you so much for coming on here. Again, we love what you're doing at Casa de Klub over there. You guys are awesome, man. This is the new wave. Hopefully you turn on MLB Network one of these days. You'll see both of our shows going, and we can continue to give back to the game, the players, and all that type of stuff. Awesome having you on here, pal.
For sure. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Klubs.